The workshop was deafening, machines roaring under the midday heat. A single dad stands before the manager's office, his work shirt stained with oil. The young manager sneers, her voice cold and arrogant. "You're done." Colleagues gather around, a few of them snickering in the background. No explanation given, no formal warning, no paperwork. The single dad unclips his employee badge and places it on the desk. He doesn't argue, he doesn't beg. He simply nods and walks away into the silence. The foreman laughs. "Don't bother coming back for your tools." But the next morning, the laughter stops when 4 black SUVs pull up to the front gate. Adrien Cole was 42 years old, a man with quiet eyes and a steady hand. He was a single dad, a man whose world revolved around one person, his 9-year-old daughter, Lily. Every morning, he made her pancakes, braided her hair with fingers that were usually stiff from mechanical work, and walked her to the elementary school just down the street. To the world, Adrien was just a man in grease-stained coveralls. He worked as a low-level maintenance technician at the massive industrial park on the edge of the city. The work was heavy, the grease was stubborn, and the pay was barely enough to cover the rent, groceries, and Lily's piano lessons. He had no health insurance, no fancy titles, and most of his younger co-workers looked at him like he was just another piece of old machinery, slowly rusting away in the corner of the warehouse. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that Adrien Cole wasn't always a maintenance guy. Before the tragedy that shattered his life, Adrien had been a senior infrastructure project lead for a global conglomerate. He was the architect of giants. He had managed multi-million-dollar budgets, supervised thousands of men, and signed off on city-sized power grids across 3 continents. He was the man companies called when the impossible needed to be built, the fixer who could see a hairline fracture in a blueprint from a mile away. But then, the accident happened. A rainy night, a distracted driver, and in a heartbeat, his wife was gone. In that moment of profound grief, the corporate ladder, the 6-figure bonuses, and the prestige meant nothing. He realized that the time he spent chasing power was time he had stolen from his family. He walked away from it all. He moved to this quiet town, chose a simple, low-level job nearby, just so he could be the one to pack Lily's lunch and pick her up from school every single afternoon. He wanted a life where the only thing that could break was a valve, not a heart. His current manager was a woman named Chloe, 26 years old, a recent MBA graduate who treated the factory floor like a video game. She was obsessed with spreadsheets and fueled by a desperate need to look powerful to her superiors. She hated old-school workers like Adrien because they didn't fit into her lean and agile vision. To her, he was just a slow-moving cost center, a relic of a bygone era. She spent her days in an air-conditioned glass office, judging men whose hands were calloused from the real work she only understood through graphs. For weeks, Adrien had been trying to warn her about the facility's aging infrastructure. The pressure valves on the main cooling system are vibrating at an abnormal frequency, he told her, standing in her pristine office. The bearings in the secondary turbine are failing. If we don't shut down Section 4 for an overhaul, the whole line will blow. The thermal expansion alone will crack the main casing. Chloe didn't even look up from her laptop. "Our numbers are down for the quarter, Adrien. I don't care about your feelings for the machinery. We have a quota to meet for the regional board, and every hour of downtime costs us $10,000. Keep it running, or I'll find someone who isn't so afraid of a little noise." Adrien tried one last time, his voice low and urgent. "It's not a feeling. It's physics. When the heat reaches the critical threshold, the fail-safes won't hold. If that line fails, it won't just stop production. It will be a safety catastrophe. There are 20 operators down there who have families. People will get hurt." Chloe finally looked at him, her eyes sharp, cold, and utterly dismissive. "I told you to leave it. Go back to your wrench, and stay away from my data. You're a technician, Adrien. You're paid to turn bolts, not to consult on my management strategy. Know your place." Adrien saw the disaster coming in slow motion over the next 48 hours. He saw the tiny hairline fractures appearing on the turbine casing like spiderwebs. He felt the floor hum with a frequency that signaled impending metal fatigue. On the second day during a peak production run, the vibration became a scream that pierced through ear protection. The temperature in Section 4 spiked into the red zone. The digital alarms were being bypassed by Chloe's productivity override software, a dangerous hack she used to keep the numbers looking good on the central server. Adrien didn't wait for a command. He looked at the faces of the young operators, oblivious to the bomb ticking beneath their feet. He stepped to the control panel and engaged the physical emergency safety shutdown. The roar of the machines died instantly. Silence fell over the factory floor, a terrifying, heavy silence that felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Chloe stormed out of her office, her heels clicking like gunshots on the concrete. Her face was a mask of pure rage. She didn't look at the temperature sensors. She didn't look at the smoking valves that were literally glowing from the friction. She only saw the production clock, which had stopped. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I saved the facility," Adrien said calmly, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. The system was seconds away from a catastrophic failure. "I stopped the thermal runaway." "You cost us $100,000 in output in 10 seconds, Chloe yelled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't make decisions here, I do. You're just a dinosaur who's afraid of modern efficiency. You think you're a hero? You're a saboteur." Adrien looked at his colleagues. They were looking at the floor, avoiding his eyes. They knew he was right, but they were afraid of Chloe's power to end their livelihoods. "You're out of line, Chloe," Adrien said quietly. "No," she sneered, stepping into his space until she could smell the oil on his shirt. "You're out of a job. Pack your trash and get out." The office was crowded, but it felt empty. Chloe had ordered Adrien into the center of the bullpen, ensuring there was a maximum audience for his humiliation. She wanted a public execution of his career to solidify her own authority and ensure no one else dared to defy her productivity targets. "Stand there," she commanded, pointing to a spot on the carpet. She didn't offer him a chair. She wanted him to feel small, like a child in the principal's office being disciplined for a crime he didn't commit. "You've been a problem since the day I got here," Chloe said, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You're slow. You're obsessed with risks that don't exist. And today, you committed an act of blatant insubordination. You stopped the line without my permission. That is a breach of contract. That is sabotage of company property. I stopped the line to prevent an explosion that would have leveled this wing," Adrien replied, his voice level, his posture straight and unshakable. "If I hadn't, the shrapnel from that turbine would have gone through the floor. Someone on that floor could have been killed. Do you understand the liability of a fatality, Chloe? Do you understand the weight of a life?" A young intern in the corner, a favorite of Chloe's who spent more time on social media than checking valves, snickered. A few others whispered, "He's just an old man making excuses for his mistake. He probably just got confused by the new control interface." Chloe smiled coldly, a cruel, triumphant expression. "We checked the logs, Adrien. According to my analysis of the digital dashboard, the system was fine. The sensors were within tolerances. You just wanted a break. Or maybe you're just too old to handle the pace of a modern facility. You're lazy. And you're obsolete." "Obsolete?" Adrien asked, a faint, dangerous spark of his old authority flickering in his eyes. He thought of the power grids he had designed that were currently lighting up entire cities. He thought of the bridges that stood because he had insisted on an extra inch of steel. "Yes," Chloe snapped. "You're done. Right now, I've already called HR. I've flagged your file for gross misconduct. I don't want to see you on this property again, not even to pack your personal effects. Security will escort you out. Pack your locker and get out." Adrien looked around the room. He saw men he had helped, people he had trained when they were just apprentices, people whose families he knew. He had lent money to the guy in the blue shirt to pay for a car repair. He had stayed late to help the woman at the front desk understand the payroll system. No one said a word. The cowardice in the room was heavier than the metal machines outside. Slowly, Adrien reached for his belt. He didn't shake. He didn't beg for his pension or a second chance. He unclipped his heavy work gloves, folded them neatly, and placed them on Chloe's desk. Then, he pulled the lanyard from around his neck. He laid the employee ID flat on the surface. "I warned you about the risks," Adrien said, looking Chloe directly in the eyes. "I have documented every warning I sent, every vibration, every temperature spike. It is all in the system, Chloe. Even the parts you tried to override with your productivity patch. You think you've deleted the truth, but the truth doesn't live on your server." "The system belongs to us," Chloe laughed, tossing his ID into the trash can beside her desk with a theatrical flick of her wrist. "And you belong on the street. Get out before I call security to drag you out in front of your daughter when she comes to look for her loser dad." That was the line. Mentioning Lily. Adrien's eyes turned to absolute ice. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He didn't even look back at his locker. He simply turned and walked out. He walked past the machines he had kept alive through sheer will, past the co-workers who wouldn't look at him, and out into the bright, uncaring sunlight of the parking lot. He sat in his old car for a long time, staring at his hands. They were still shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, burning clarity. He looked at a photo of Lily taped to his dashboard. She was 5 years old in the picture, wearing a future engineer t-shirt. "You're done," they had said. Adrien started the engine. The old car rumbled to life. "We'll see," he whispered to himself, a grim smile finally touching his lips. "We'll see who is truly done when the sun comes up." If you believe that some people don't need to justify themselves today, because they know tomorrow will speak for them, subscribe to follow the moment everything begins to flip. That night, the house was quiet. Adrien sat at the small kitchen table, watching Lily finish her homework. She was working on a science project about electricity, meticulously drawing a circuit diagram. "Did you finish early today, Daddy?" she asked, looking up with a curious smile. "You didn't have grease on your face when you picked me up from school, and you didn't have that machine smell." Adrien reached out, stroking her hair. "I did, sweetheart. I think I'm going to be spending a lot more time with you for a while. We might even go to the park tomorrow morning and get that ice cream we talked about." "Is that a good thing?" she asked, her eyes searching his for the truth she sensed was hidden. "The best thing," he replied, his heart aching for the job he lost, but his mind already moving 5 steps ahead. After Lily went to bed, Adrien didn't sleep. He sat in front of his old, battered laptop in the darkened living room. For years, he had kept his old professional life buried in an encrypted folder marked Archives. He hadn't touched those files since the day he buried his wife. He had wanted to be invisible, a ghost in the machine. But they wouldn't let him be invisible. They had dragged his pride into the mud, and more importantly, they had endangered the town he called home. Tonight, he opened the vault. He logged into a secure portal, one that used an old RSA hardware token and an encrypted key he hadn't used in years. As a former project lead for the parent company, the massive global conglomerate that actually owned the industrial park and 10 others like it across the state, Adrien still had high-level security clearance that had never been revoked. In the world of high-level infrastructure, you don't just quit the security protocols. You are retired, but your keys often stay active in the emergency response tiers. He was a ghost user in their global system. He began to type. He didn't write an angry letter. He didn't complain about Chloe's attitude or her snide remarks. Instead, he wrote a cold, technical, devastating audit. He pulled the raw data from the maintenance logs he had secretly mirrored to his personal drive over the months. He showed the vibration patterns, the heat signatures, and the exact timestamp when he engaged the safety shutdown. Then, he attached the ignored emails he had sent to Chloe. Crucially, he included the metadata showing she had opened those emails, read them, and then manually overrode the system alarms just hours later. He sent the report directly to the Corporate Risk Management Division, At the global headquarters in the capital, he flagged it as a Level 1 life safety violation and asset endangerment. When a report like that hits a conglomerate's system from a user with Adrien's legacy credentials, it triggers an automatic, unstoppable protocol. It's called a red flag audit. No local manager can delete it. No supervisor can hide it. It bypasses the entire local hierarchy and goes straight to the board of directors, the general counsel, and the insurance underwriters. Adrien watched the progress bar as the file uploaded. 10%, 50%, 100%. Sent. Within minutes. Thousands of miles away, red lights began flashing on a dashboard in a high-security operations center. The data was undeniable. Adrien had prevented a $50 million explosion and a potential mass casualty event, and the local management had fired him for it. The corporate machine, usually slow and bloated, moved with terrifying speed when money, liability, and lives were on the line. By 3 a.m., the CEO of the conglomerate was on an emergency conference call with the head of engineering. By 5 a.m., a private security and compliance detail was briefed in a hangar. By 7 a.m., a fleet of vehicles was dispatched from the regional headquarters just 2 hours away. Adrien woke up early. He didn't put on his grease-stained coveralls. Instead, he went to the back of his closet and pulled out a garment bag he hadn't opened in years. He found his old suit, the charcoal gray one he had worn to board meetings in London and Tokyo. It was a bit loose now that he'd lost some corporate weight, but it still commanded respect. He polished his shoes until they shone like mirrors. He tied his tie with a steady, practiced hand. He walked Lily to school, kissed her on the forehead, and told her to have a wonderful day. He told her he might be a little late to pick her up, but that someone very important was coming to help him. Then, instead of going to the park, he walked back toward the industrial park. At the front gate, the security guards started to stand up to block him, his hand reaching for his radio. "Hey, Adrien, I told you yesterday, you're banned. Chloe said if I see your face on the cameras, I have to call the local sheriff." Adrien didn't stop. He didn't even look at the guard. He just checked his watch and pointed toward the road behind him. Suddenly, the sound of heavy, powerful V8 engines filled the air. 4 identical, black, armored SUVs turned the corner in perfect formation. They didn't slow down. They pulled up directly behind Adrien, their tinted windows gleaming like obsidian under the harsh morning sun. The security guard's jaw dropped. The gates began to slide open. Not because the guard pressed a button, but because the remote command had come from the central corporate hub, overriding the local gate control. Adrien stepped into the lead vehicle. The interior smelled of expensive leather and cold air conditioning. "To the main office," he said to the driver. "It's time to check the books." The industrial park was buzzing with the usual morning rumors. Everyone was talking about the crazy old man who got fired yesterday. Chloe was in her office, sipping an expensive artisan coffee, feeling like the undisputed queen of her domain. She was already interviewing candidates to replace Adrien, looking for someone younger, cheaper, and more compliant with her spreadsheet-driven reality. Then, the SUVs arrived. They didn't park in the visitor's lot. They drove right onto the sidewalk, blocking the main entrance. They looked like a funeral procession for someone's career. The employees stopped working. The machines continued to hum, but all eyes were fixed on the glass doors of the lobby. A team of 6 men and women in dark, impeccably tailored suits stepped out. They weren't local police. They were corporate compliance officers and forensic auditors from the parent company's internal affairs division. They didn't look happy, and in the middle of them, walking with a stride that looked like it belonged in a skyscraper, not a warehouse, was Adrien Cole. The office staff scrambled, confused and terrified. Chloe burst out of her office, her face pale, her coffee spilling slightly onto her white blouse. "What is this? Who authorized this?" "Adrien, I told you to leave. I'm calling the authorities." One of the women in suits stepped forward, showing a holographic badge that carried the conglomerate's supreme seal, a mark of authority that made Chloe's local manager title look like a toy. Internal audit and risk mitigation. We are here under the Emergency Asset Protection Clause. We are seizing all operational logs, personnel files, and local server data. This facility is now under emergency corporate review. Chloe's voice shook, her bravado evaporating instantly. Audit? For what? Everything is fine. Our productivity is at an all-time high. I've optimized the output by 15%. According to the ghost audit received at 11:42 p.m. last night, the woman said, her voice like a razor, this facility was operating under a level 1 risk for 3 consecutive weeks. We have the raw data logs you tried to suppress. We have the emails you ignored. And we have the report on the technician who prevented the disaster and was terminated without cause for doing his job. The entire office went dead silent. The snickering intern from the day before looked like he was about to faint. The team moved with surgical precision. They didn't ask permission. They didn't need it. They walked into Chloe's office, took her laptop, and locked her out of every corporate system in 10 seconds. They began pulling the physical files from the cabinets. Adrien stood in the center of the room, the very spot where he had been humiliated the day before. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man who had finally finished a difficult, dirty, but necessary job. The corporate lead turned to the room, speaking to the entire staff. We have reviewed the ignored warnings. We have reviewed the emergency safety shutdown. Adrien Cole's actions saved this facility, the surrounding neighborhood, and your lives. The turbine he shut down was found to be 3 degrees of thermal expansion away from total structural failure. If he hadn't acted, most of you wouldn't be here today. He looked at Chloe, who was leaning against her desk for support, looking small and defeated. Your termination papers are being drafted as we speak. You will be escorted out immediately, and we will be pursuing a civil suit for gross negligence and endangerment of company assets. The afternoon sun was warm and golden, casting long shadows across the industrial park. The black SUVs were still parked outside, but the atmosphere in the park had changed. It felt lighter, safer. The machines were running again, but this time, they were running at safe levels, under the supervision of a team that actually understood the mechanics. Chloe was escorted from the building by the same security guard who had tried to block Adrien that morning. She didn't have a box of belongings. She didn't have a goodbye. She was just gone. The people who had laughed at Adrien or stayed silent while he was being insulted were now standing in a literal line, waiting for a chance to speak to him. They were apologizing, making excuses, hoping he wouldn't remember their cowardice. The corporate lead stood next to Adrien on the loading dock. Mr. Cole, the board has been briefed on your history. They were shocked and frankly embarrassed that someone of your caliber was working in a maintenance role. They've seen your past records from the infrastructure division. He paused, letting the weight of the offer settle. They are asking if you would consider returning to headquarters. We need a global director of safety and infrastructure. The salary is, well, it's triple what you used to make as a lead, plus a significant bonus, stock options, and a car service. We need your eyes on the global grid. Adrien looked at the factory floor. He looked at the machines that were finally being serviced properly by a new competent team. He looked at the men who were finally working without the fear of a hidden explosion. I have a condition, Adrien said. Anything, the lead replied instantly. The CEO said to give you whatever you want to make this right. I won't work in the city, Adrien said, his voice firm. I stay here. In this town, I'll take the role of senior technical consultant for this entire region. I work when the machines need me. I set the safety standards, but I leave every day at 3 p.m. No exceptions, no late-night board meetings via Zoom, no emergency calls after dinner. Why 3 p.m., the lead asked, confused by the lack of corporate ambition for a man who had just won it all. Because my daughter gets out of school at 3:15, Adrien smiled, a genuine warm expression that hadn't been seen on his face in years. And she's the only boss I ever want to answer to again. Fame and power are obsolete to me. Being a dad isn't. A few minutes later, Adrien walked out to the gate. Lily was standing there, her backpack drooping, her eyes wide as she saw her dad walking out with the men in suits in the shiny black cars. She didn't see the mechanic with oil on his face. She saw her hero. "Daddy!" she yelled, running toward him with her arms wide. "Why are those cars so big? Are you a secret agent now?" Adrien picked her up, swinging her around as the suit-clad men bowed their heads in respect to the man they once ignored. "They're just cars, Lily," Adrien whispered into her ear. "But they helped me remind some people that doing the right thing is never obsolete, and being your dad is the most important job in the world." He walked her to his old car, the black SUVs following slowly behind like a royal guard, until they reached the edge of the neighborhood. Adrien was no longer just a single dad. He was a man who had proven that silence isn't weakness. It's just the calm before the truth strikes with the force of 4 black SUVs. If you believe that a well-timed silence can change the entire world, subscribe for more stories and leave a comment. What would you do if someone unfairly told you you're done?